ha nem sikerült az antiszemitizmusról szóló adásunkkal levetetni a középidőt a műsorrendről, akkor majd most, hiszen hát évek óta azzal vádol engem a magyar szélsőjobb, hogy magam csempészem be az iszlámot a ballomkabátom zsebibe a Kárpát-medencébe. Neztek, itt van, meghoztam a csomagot.
For me, also my PhD, everything starts with my mother. Like, I don't know if Freud would love me, I'm sure.
Vienna gets the prize for being the most livable city. It's like, I think, the 5th time in a row that at the same time where Muslims are facing the highest numbers of discrimination. So it's a big topic, and we don't talk about emotions of Muslims and how does it feel to live in such a country in Europe.
Politicians are really like instrumentalizing fear. You know, that shows that there is no interest in actually understanding, you know, how do we live with each other when we're not all the same, which is something we do all the time anyway.
For the Muslim part of the world, take it from Bosnia, come to Palestine, and then go to Asia, to Bangladesh, to Myanmar, to Uyghurs. What do we know about them? Not a lot. And this is one of the things that Western media uses as a tool to further alienate people from color, from religion, from race, and then to kind of separate their suffering at the end.
At the job market, they are discriminated against. Very often it's like, oh yeah, because of hijab. No, it's because of racism. It's as simple as that.
Should I veil? Should I not veil? And people have all kinds of opinions about it. I mean, somehow women's bodies everywhere are such like a canvas for opinions and judgment. You know, this is something that Muslim women have to deal with everywhere.
A Középidő egy osztrák-magyar produkció és az új kedvenc beszélgetős műsorotok, ahol európai ügyekről van szó, meg arról, hogy mire kellene jobban ügyelnie Európának. Én Papréka Kinga vagyok, a vendégeim pedig válogatott művészek, kutatók, újságírók és szakemberek Európa minden sarkából. 2 hetente jelentkezünk új adással, úgyhogy iratkozzatok fel most, a jobb alsó sarokban lévő gombra kattintva, válasszátok ki a kis csengőikont, és emellé még állítsatok be 10-17 további emlékeztetőt, hogy véletlenül sem maradjatok le egyetlen adásról sem. A magyarok egy része úgy tekint az iszlámra, mint valami idegen testre, ami elkezdett betüremkedni közénk. Ezzel a keresztény gyökerű európaiak többsége is így van. Ennél nagyobbat nem is tévedhetnének. Az iszlám a keletkezése óta jelen van Európában. Egy olyan 1700 évről beszélünk. Sőt, egyes nemzetek keletkezése óta is. Hadd emlékeztessek itt minden muszlim gyűlölő helyde magyart arra az alaposan adatolt tényre, hogy a honfoglaló magyarokkal együtt 3 muszlim törzs is érkezett a Kárpát-medencébe. Ők voltak a böszörmények, akiknek a neve konkrétan azt jelenti, hogy muzulmánok. Hajdúböszörmény, Tisza-Eszlár, Dunavarsány reprezent. Ezek a jó emberek kereskedelemre és pénzügyekre szakosodtak a fiatal magyar államban, kincstári jövedelemkezelők, pénzverők és vámosok voltak, illetve bizonyos harcászati feladatokra is szakosodtak, híresen kiváló íjászokat adtak például. Egészen a tatárjárásig meg is őrizték a vallási autonómiájukat, még az agresszív katolicizálás idején is. Erről több korabeli írásos forrás is fennmaradt muszlim utazóktól. A mór jogtudós és vándorteológus Abu Hamid al-Garnati al-Andalusi egyenesen azt írta az Árpád-házi II. Géza királyról, hogy ez a király szereti a muszlimokat. Gézukám, micsoda szakál! A tatárjárás aztán elsöpörte a böszörményeket, persze az 1200-as évek portyázó tatárjait nem lehetett diszkriminációval vádolni, ők mindenkit megöltek, aki az útjukba került, etnikai és vallási előítélettől teljesen mentesen. Szűcs Jenő vonatkozó cikkét linkeljük a videó leírásában, abból többet is megtudhattuk a honfoglaló böszörményekről. De nem csak itt tanyáztak muszlimok a középkorban, hanem Kelet-Európa szerte, Szicíliában és persze a mai Spanyolország területén, ahol Al-Andalus néven 700 évig uralkodtak az omajádok, a központjuk Kordoba volt. Miközben Nyugat-Európa eretnekeket üldözött és nagy erőkkel pusztította a saját kulturális örökségét, #sötét középkor, addig a muszlim világban és a keleti keresztény Bizáncban virágzottak a tudományok és a művészetek. Az ókori görög és római irodalom nagy része is muszlim közvetítéssel jutott vissza a nyugati keresztényekhez, nélkülük azt se tudnánk, hány esszel írják azt, hogy Arisztofanész. A középkori muszlim világnak köszönhetünk egy sor tudományos vívmányt a filozófiában, az optika terén, a gyógyászatban, a csillagászatban, és persze a matematikában. Aki pedig nem szereti a matekot, gondoljon csak bele, mennyivel lenne nehezebb ugyanazt a példát arab számok helyett római számokkal megoldani. A A középkori európai kalifátusokban olyan vallási toleranciát gyakoroltak, amelytől bármely római pápa kiugrott volna a bugyogójából, és páran ki is ugrottak. A keresztes hadjáratoknak papíron a Szentföld elfoglalása volt a célja, de legalább ennyire szolgálták a pápai hatalom megerősítését a rendetlenkedő uralkodók, mondjuk a német-római császárság fölött. Az 1000 éves keleti keresztény birodalom Bizánc bukását is a keresztes hadjáratoknak köszönhetjük, meg egy pestis járvány, 200 évnyi értelmetlen erőszakot, meg ilyesmi. Ezzel persze nem azt szeretném mondani, hogy az iszlám többségű országokban mindig köftéből volt a kerítés, de ha az ember választás elé kerül, biztos akad, aki élhetőbbnek találná a kordobai vallási türelmet a véres eretneküldözésekkel szemben. Biztos elfogult vagyok. Persze a középkor óta eltelt egy fél évezred, és azóta sok vér lefolyt a Tiszán, meg a Dunán. Az oszmán birodalom hódító hadjáratai nyilván lendületet adtak a nyugati keresztények muszlim ellenességének. Ezeknek az emlékezetéből táplálkozott sok helyen a romantikus nacionalizmus ellenségképe is, török gyerek megvágta, magyar gyerek gyógyítja jeligére. Igaz, bizonyos irodalmi művekben a török hódoltság borzalmai igazából a Habsburg uralom allegóriájaként szolgáltak akkoriban, amikor arról nem lehetett szabadon írni, azt ma valahogy mégse utáljuk annyira az osztrákokat. Lehet, hogy a mai magyar rasszisták egyszerűen csak túl sok klasszikus magyar irodalmat olvastak? Nem valószínű. Mindezt csak azért reppelem el, hogy világos legyen. A muszlim világ 1300 éve része az európai kultúrának, nem valamiféle távoli, idegen, ami mostanában tűnt fel. De hogy néz ki manapság az iszlám? 1.900.000.000 féleképpen, ugyanis a második legnépesebb világvallásról van szó, amelynek közel 2 milliárd követője épp olyan sokféle, mint a keresztények világszerte. Hadd idézzem ide a Migrációkutató Központ kutatási vezetőjét, Saifo Omárt, akivel online beszélgettem a mai adásunkhoz.
Tudni kell, hogy a muszlim embereknek, mint hogy a keresztény embereknek, az ateista embereknek, a hinduknak az identitása sokrétű. A vallás az egy fontos tényező, valakinek fontosabb, valakinek kevésbé, de számos egyéb vetülete is van az identitásának. Egy muszlim amellett még lehet török, lehet, ha Németországról beszélünk, berlini lakos, lehet egy családnak a tagja, lehet meghatározott futballcsapatnak a szurkolója, tehát egy összetett identitásrendszerről van szó. Mert ugyebár egy nigériai keresztény jobban hasonlít egy nigériai muszlimra, mint kulturálisan, tehát általános értékeket, családi értéket, vagy munkaetikát, politikához való, autoritáshoz való hozzáállását tekintve, mint egy dániai keresztényhez. Vagy hát egy bosnyák gyakorlatilag közelebb áll egy szerbhez, mint egy irakihoz. Noha a vallásuk elméletileg egy. Tehát itt van ez a kulturális vetület, amit nagyon gyakran figyelmen kívül hagyunk, pláne a mostani vulgarizált közbeszédben, és leegyszerűsítjük vallás kérdésére az ügyet.
Saifo Omár még megszólal a mai adásban, de a teljes beszélgetésünket podcast formájában a videó leírásában találjátok. Önmagában is fontos volna arról beszélnünk, hogyan boldogulnak a muszlim és muszlim hátterű emberek az európai társadalmakban, Törökországtól és Boszniától Franciaországig és Dániáig. A kérdésnek fájdalmas aktualitást ad részben a populista politikában elharapózó muszlim ellenesség, részben pedig az a bénultság, amivel Palesztina és Izrael konfliktusát kezeljük a közbeszédben. Persze butaság volna úgy tenni, mintha egy ilyen terhelt témában igazságot tudnánk tenni egy félórás beszélgetős műsorban, azt viszont meg tudjuk tenni, hogy megkapargatjuk azokat a tényezőket, amik miatt ilyen nehéz a palesztin-izraeli konfliktusról tényszerűen, tisztán és nyugodtan beszélni. A nyugat-európai kulturális és politikai identitásnak egy DNS-szerű kettős spirálját alkotja az egymással összefonódó antiszemitizmus és muszlim ellenesség. A legutóbbi adásban az előbbivel foglalkoztunk, nézzétek meg azt is, link a leírásban. Most pedig arról lesz szó, mit tapasztalnak azok az európaiak, akik muszlimként vagy muszlim örökséggel élnek itt. Mi nem fogunk senki mellett kampányolni, hanem az a célunk, hogy közelebb hozzuk a témát hozzátok. Egy magyar és egy török vendég csatlakozik Budapestről, Bécsből pedig 2 osztrák vendég, akik palesztin és bangladesi gyökereik által kapcsolódnak a témához. Saifo Omár a Migrációkutató Intézet kutatási vezetője, magyar közel-kelet kutató, vele magyarul beszélgettem, amelyet teljes egészében meghallgathattok podcast formában az alábbi linken, keressétek a videó leírásában. Priyanka Hucsenreiter, osztrák kulturális antropológus, a londoni SOAS Egyetemen doktorált, ő az Eurozin projektvezetője. A kutatásaiban dél-ázsiai és európai muszlimok vallásos és szekuláris tapasztalatait vizsgálja queer feminista elméleti szemszögből. Amani Abuzere író filozófiából doktorált, és az osztrák médiában az egyik legismertebb megszólaló az iszlám kultúra és a muszlim ellenes rasszizmus témáiban. Zeynep Feriha Demir kulturális menedzser, a műsorunk egyik gyártásvezetője. Isztambulban nevelkedett, de pár éve Budapesten tanult, és itt dolgozik, többek között a Balkan Dance kollektívával és az Isztambul Fringe Fesztivállal is. Köszönjük az Altes Kunstvereinnek Bécsben és a Sebestyén György osztrák könyvtárnak Budapesten a vendéglátást. Vágjunk bele! A teljes adást megnézhetitek az eredeti otthonában a displayeurope.eu oldalon 15 nyelvű felirattal, a műsort készítő Eurozin magazin csatornáján angolul, illetve hát legkényelmesebben az átlátszó csatornáján magyarul. Iratkozzatok fel! Welcome and thank you so much for coming to talk about this very light and easy topic. Amani, you research Islamophobia both as a political phenomenon and in its effect on the individual. So tell us about your insight and your research, how this fares in Europe.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a very important question because, as you already said, it's not about us versus them. It's actually racism and Islamophobia and anti-Muslim racism is a very European problem. It's a problem, well, deeply rooted within European history and not just history, like the recent years. There's a very new report that showed the Fundamental Rights Agency, and they showed the new numbers were just, they came out like last month. And in this new study, they showed that Europe has a very big problem being racist against Muslims, against Muslim people. And discrimination against Muslim women is very high. And even if you look a little bit deeper, which countries in Europe are the most racist ones, Austria takes the first place.
Oh my God.
Austria is like the percentage is like 71% of Muslims experience discrimination. And on a daily basis, not just like individuals who are discriminating against them, also on a structural level in employment, housing, educational field. So it's like a huge problem. And Germany just follows, and there are many different European countries. This new study, it shows we have a big issue here. We have a big problem. If you talk about racism, it's not just how do we deal with Muslims. It's a very European problem. It's like very well rooted within the, as I said, in the history.
Yeah, also like already the question, how do we deal with Muslims like Muslims haven't been present in Europe since Islam was conceived. But there seems to be a strong push for, like I would say, a postmodern version of anti-Muslim hate, which seems to me very happy to conflate Muslims with Arabs and these categories with each other. And I understand it's hard to remember more than two things at once, but it's possible people do that. How do you see this, this political, I wouldn't say movement, but this political technology? What is the new element of this kind of 21st century anti-Muslim racism? I
mean, it's very often that politicians, they use that emotion of hate and fear to secure their position of power, to govern. And there's a very interesting analysis from the American philosopher Martha Nussbaum and the French politician Dominique Moisy. And they said, like, if you look at Europe and you try to map out which emotions are very dominant, it's usually fear. People are afraid. And that's actually very normal to be afraid of. But the problem here is that with anti-Muslim racism and Islamophobia, it's like an imagined fear. They are trying to show people, you are afraid, we are giving you the solution. And the solution is like to divide and rule. And there's a very interesting example of Paul Watzlawick. He talks about a man who keeps clapping his hands every 10 seconds. And the other person asks him, why are you clapping your hands like that? And he said, yeah, to tell the elephants to go away, to make elephants afraid. And the other man says, but there are no elephants. You keep clapping. He said, yeah, you see, that's why it works. I'm clapping my hands so no elephant is coming near us. And that's a little bit an example to explain imagined fear. very often people try to explain, yeah, we are afraid of Muslims, Arabs, and people who look like foreign to us, terrorists, we don't know who they are. And politicians, they are very, I don't want to say in general, but European policy making is like really going that way to use that kind of fear and fooling hate and fear. Because if we wanted to deal with certain problems, it's about economy and retirement plan and how to take care of elder people and hospitals. And we have so many different problems, but yeah.
Out-migration, may I mention, because we're obsessed with refugees and migrants coming into Europe, but we have a huge out-migration problem across most of Europe.
Yeah, but it's being portrayed as a problem. But if you want to look at the real problems, it's almost like politicians are afraid to address them, and instead they try to create a scenario of fear and to deal with that kind with people and the countries. So it's I think that's not really new, but it works very well. It works, and that's why, like the FPÖ in Austria, the party, Freedom Party, they really gained in the last polls. And because they very well know how to use those emotions. And I think very often we forget that if we talk about anti-Muslim racism, that it's also a very emotional affair. But very often we talk about the majority of people, what they are feeling and how they feel, but we don't talk about Muslims, what kind of emotions they go through. How is it like living? For example, we are in Vienna here, living in the city, the most livable city of the world. And it's not like, oh, wow, that's a new thing, 2024. Vienna gets the prize for being the most livable city. It's like, I think, the 5th time in a row that we get this prize in Vienna, but at the same time, the capital is in a country where Muslims are facing the highest numbers of discrimination. So it's a big topic. And we don't talk about emotions of Muslims and how does it feel to live in such a country in Europe.
Yeah, I live here in Favoriten, which, as you know, is like immigrant town. Many districts are. Before that, I lived in Hernas. That's also immigrant capital. And I live very close to the spot where one of the top Hungarian ministers shot a video talking about how this part of Vienna has become a no-go zone. And Favoritenstraße is this beautiful, very lively pedestrian street, like a shopping street, probably the most fun place in Vienna I've ever been. And I don't know what he felt threatened by, whether it was the carpet shops, where there's great textiles, or the fact that people actually know how to season food, which for some Austrians might be frightening to some extent. But this kind of manufactured experience, I think, is very, very familiar. And I sometimes feel that it's not too dissimilar from this rotation of groups to hate. Sometimes it's women who want rights. Sometimes it's LGBTQIA plus people who want to be treated as humans and not beaten to death. Sometimes it's going to be ethnic minorities or religious minorities. But you have already mentioned that Muslim women especially experience a lot of discrimination and hatred. Priyanka, you have worked with Bangladeshi women on their experiences. Can you tell us about this?
I did my PhD and follow-up research on the middle and upper middle class in Bangladesh and in the capital in Dhaka, which is very different, obviously, from the rest of the country. It's a very urban space. And it was about how people are practicing and also how they deal with difference, because, you know, in one family, people deal very differently with their faith and their practice. And there is a lot of contention there. And for me, that was really interesting to see how and to think about how people are dealing with this kind of difference every day, because I felt that I was also influenced by the kind of Islamophobic discourse here, in the sense that, it's something I've experienced, less directly, because I'm not visibly Muslim. I don't veil. I think things are a lot harder for women who veil. And
you also have the most Austrian name ever.
Yeah, my last name is very Austrian. My first name isn't Muslim. I have a Bengali Sanskrit first name. So it's harder for people to identify me in general. So, but I've seen it, also through my mother, also through how she raised me, as, she's like, she kind of didn't want me to stand out too much as Muslim. If I had rashes, she would use like, she got from Bangladesh, this like holy water from a Sufi shrine, but I wasn't allowed to tell anybody that like she was like trying to heal me with these things.
Is this because she was concerned for your safety, or it's like this cultural passing thing? What do you think? Or like a combination?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to speak for her, obviously, but I think these, knowing her and also, the way she's also really internalized, like me and her discuss this a lot all the time, that she's kind of internalized some of these, she says like, when something, when there's been an attack that's said in the name of Islam, she says like, look what we've done. And I'm saying, this is not us. Like, this is not we. Don't lump us in with these people, with everything, like why? Yeah, so for me, and that really hurts me. And I see it obviously hurts her too. So anyway, long story short, I decided to, I was really interested in how people in Bangladesh, specifically because I have the connection, but also in a Muslim majority context, are also always dealing with, with difference in how, in values, in how to practice, how to believe, how not to, how to deal with the kinds of, secularism that are happening there, because it's quite different from here. Yeah, it is a big part of Islamophobia is not knowing how to deal with difference, and also not wanting to know how to deal with difference. And, in the way like, how Amani, you were just saying, that politicians are really like instrumentalizing fear, that shows that there is no interest in actually understanding, how do we live with each other when we're not all the same, which is something we do all the time anyway. And when it comes to women in Bangladesh, for example, again, like, also in the middle and the upper middle class, there are a lot of variations in dress. There are also discussions about like, should I veil, should I not veil? And people have all kinds of opinions about it. I mean, somehow women's bodies everywhere are such like a canvas for opinions and judgment, and this is something that Muslim women have to deal with everywhere. But of course, in the context of Europe, of Islamophobia, that takes on extremely specific connotations.
I think the debates around veiling and banning of the hijab in France and elsewhere, and people losing their minds over the full body coverage bathing suits, which for a very hairy person that I am, that just sounds like heaven. I wouldn't have to ever do anything about these legs anymore. So I don't quite get why especially women are upset by this. Like, so many people are so happy to tell you what to do with your body, as opposed to, maybe allowing you to make your own decisions and possibly offer you alternatives if they feel like that's necessary. This discourse has become extremely toxic in a way that can be familiar from, I would say, 1700s, 1800s. This is a very colonial discourse where people are proposing to save women from others. And of course, Chakravarti Spivak comes to mind, and so many others. But I wonder, now that you brought up the issue of terror attacks, which since the 2000s has been a very strong association, very much propelled by US anti-Muslim hate, how we talk about violence when it is perpetrated by or attributed to Muslims or Arabs, and how we talk about this when the victims or the target are Muslims and or Arabs. Zainab, how do you see discourse and media coverage on this from a bit more of a media worker's point of view?
Yeah, so what I'm hearing a lot here is fear and body image, and fear through body image and with body image. So this immediately brings to my mind the media coverage. So what we see on media, either we hear or see, it's very visual and it's very attacking on our sensory perception of things. So this fear is quite rightly and also quite big reflected on the media coverage. So what Europe and United States really does well is to kind of inflict this fear upon people even more every day with the media coverage and with the selection of events and images and topics, and to kind of fuel this fear. So as practicing Muslims, people already have fear by their identities and how they are integrated in the society and how they can act and how they can show if they are practicing or not, from the family they belong to or not. Maybe we shouldn't talk about this. This is like a shush topic. However, the Western media coverage really fuels this fear and then hatred and then xenophobia and then Islamophobia. So this is a whole chain that is really well perpetrated by the media coverage that we are exposed to every single day in our lives. So it is very telling, therefore, that we hear about the conflicts and the genocides that are happening in the whiter part of the world very well. We research about those, we know what's happening. However, for the Muslim part of the world, take it from Bosnia, come to Palestine, and then go to Asia, to Bangladesh, to Myanmar, to Uyghurs. What do we know about them? Not a lot. And this is one of the things that Western media uses as a tool to further alienate people from color, from religion, from race, and then to kind of separate their suffering at the end. Suffering, in my opinion, should be equal. We suffer a lot as the citizens of the world in 2024 since we have existed. However, if you separate the suffering from the color, from the religion, from the cultural background that you're coming, then that really creates like an unfair environment for people to judge. And unfortunately, we are bound to media to learn. We are bound to media to hear. We are bound to media to form our opinion. And whoever writes the media, whoever writes the books, really dictates what we think at the end.
So what you say, Zainab, is that I'm supposed to empathize with 6 billion people, and I'm very tired and very busy, and I don't have time even for my own family members, right? How can you expect that of me? Is kind of the impression that I often get, that it seems like we have to choose a group that we are loyal to and everybody else matters less. I'm not sure if that's a helpful frame of mind to deal with the devastation of conflict or to deal with each other's humanity. Ha öltözködnél, de nem akarsz vele rengeteg szemetet termelni, vagy ha érdekesebb ruhákra vágysz, mint a sok egyforma, mindig pont ugyanolyan fast fashion, akármicsoda, akkor nézz el a Swappies boltjaiba, vagy a honlapjukra, ahova beviheted a használt ruháidat, amelyek tiszták, jó állapotúak, de már nem használod őket, és hozhatsz is el onnan. Swappies.hu. Köszönjük szépen a ruhákat, amiket az adásainkhoz adtak, ez is onnan van. Amani, you deal with people's experiences also on the personal level. So can you tell us about strategies, how they cope with what they find, and maybe how we can actually combat that? Because you 3 have made a very strong case. What would be a good point of intervention in this situation?
I mean, racism is like a multi-perspective phenomenon, so it needs to be addressed from different perspectives, from different parts, and it depends where you work, and it depends what kind of resources you have. Like, for example, media coverage, very important to include different stories, to include, to stop misrepresentation and start like representation. So from that part, it needs to change. And it already changes, because very often the topic is very hard, but at the same time I think it's really important to show there is hope, and already people are trying to change it, to change the narrative. On an academia level, on study level, to show, for example, the study I just talked about from the Agency for Fundamental Rights, who showed like the huge part of discrimination against Muslims. We need those numbers. We need that to show we have a big, big problem. Go into the field of schools, universities, and change the curricula. Change the books we are using to teach students, to teach kindergarten children. For example, we know there are many different parts who are using like Muslims as the bad image to make it clear to children who are like the good people. For example, there's a very racist children's song and children's book, Hachi Brachi's Luftballon. And we need to change that as well. We can't just go into the main library or in bookshops and buy those books and give it to children to read, and they learn that black people, Muslim people are a threat. I mean, I could go on and on. Everyone has to look at themselves and their institutions and their possibilities to change. We need change on different levels. And from a Muslim point of view, I think it's very important to own your own story. Because very often it's like majority versus minority. That's not the case. We are all living in the same society. We are using the same public transportation, the same supermarket, same school, etc. What we need to understand that with our anti-Muslim racism, we are moving people from within society to the outside part of society. So we have to stop that, and at the same time for Muslims it's important to speak up, to own their own identity and be true to their own religion in which part they are comfortable with. Everyone has a possibility to change.
You cannot separate media coverage from education, media literacy from education. So this is what we really lack here in Europe. We have all this coverage, we have all the academia behind media coverage and media literacy. However, we do not teach this in school from a very young age. You are trained as a media reader if you choose to, study that as your master's or like bachelor's. So you have no idea how to read the news or how to differentiate if it's fake or not, or how to differentiate if it's racist or not. So education really supports your media literacy, and being able to read the media, being able to read between the racist lines, sometimes we are really served in a very delicate way, really differentiates you from the rest of the public. Also, the second thing you said, owning up to it, it's very hard. I'm not a practicing Muslim. I grew up in a Muslim household, which was a very mild Muslim, like it's more or less cultural Muslim. However, I know what it entails. I know the belief, and I know the must and mustn'ts. And even I am 30 years old, and until a couple of years ago, I was uncomfortable with saying that I grew up in a Muslim family. I do not know why. It is so ingrained in the back of my brain that to say that I grew up in a Muslim household, coming from a very cosmopolitan city and country, still owning up to it is good. And it makes your case better, and it makes your visibility better, and then you have a case that you can back up.
Priyanka, you've already mentioned a story about this, both the sort of internalizing the environment's messaging about who you are and about owning your story. Can you tell us about your experience?
I don't know where to start exactly, because for me, also my PhD, everything starts with my mother. I don't know, Freud would love me, I'm sure. She taught me that belief is really important, and we always celebrated Eid. She doesn't know how to pray properly in the kind of traditional way of saying prayers 5 times a day. And that's something, so I do, but it's something I learned in Bangladesh from my relatives there, and also from YouTube, because that's how the world works now. Yeah, she always taught me that faith is really important, but also to hide it and not to externalize it. And so that's how I also became really interested in how the secular works. And that's why it was really nice to go to Bangladesh and realize that secularism can work in very different ways. Because in Bangladesh, I imagine in a lot of contexts as well, it sounds a bit like in Turkey too, that secularism means different religions living together, and that's not an issue.
For me, having a completely different religious upbringing, being raised Catholic, partially by Calvinists, which is this inherent little tension, this sort of these kinds of, poking each other in a post-communist country where nobody was supposed to be practicing any religion for a good long time. I do recognize a lot of things working in Austria about how Catholic this state is, which is surprising for me, genuinely. We still have a public holiday dedicated to the fact that parents just hate to talk about sex with their children. This is the day of the Immaculate Conception, 8th of December. That's when my sister was born. Happy birthday, Zsófia. So there are these weird, for a secular state, nonsensical holidays littered across the year. There's all these things that I only recognize because I had this kind of upbringing, and it makes me wonder why this is a universal norm. Or do you all see a change in parents bringing up kids in Europe and their attitudes from generation to generation?
If you talk about families, it's very hard to talk in general, but especially people coming from other countries to build a new life. For many parents, it was struggling, so their kids could have a better future, better life, better education. And sometimes it's really hard for the children to benefit from those from the better education, because now they have to have it figured out. But at the same time, at the job market, they are discriminated against. Very often it's because of hijab. No, it's because of racism. It's as simple as that. And I think it's so, and very often those kids and those teenagers and those they have to work like twice as hard and get half the chance.
Don't you think that is still very baffling that this colonial discourse continues up until that day, up until this day, like 2024, we are still using the methods both in media coverage and also executing our cultural life within the same city that we live. We are still using the mindset and the discourse of the 18th, 19th century. Like, basically, there are conflicts in Middle East. There is conflict in the Muslim Asia. There is a lot of conflict that is inflicted upon by white people, by European governments. There has been colonization of a whole continent. And then when those people are sick of the financial hardships, you know, and sick of the physical violence, that they don't want to die, they just want to work. So let's go to Europe. If they say that they are much better than us, if they come here to teach us how to live, so let's go and let's see their ways. And then they come here and then they are separated from the rest of the city, the country, the cultural life. And then where does it end? Which direction the immigrants or, you know, colored people will go? How can they integrate? So this whole European concept, integration is a European concept, actually brought about by European Union itself. It's one of the pillars of the Union stands upon, and they are tackling this for many years.
We do have to talk about the elephant in the room, and, you know, we set out with this topic admitting that we're not going to do justice to Gaza in a talk show episode. That would be foolish to even endeavor, and it would leave us wanting a lot. But we do have to address the fact that much of Europe is either reluctant to acknowledge Palestinians as like full right human beings who are entitled to self-determination, human rights, safety. How do you experience this? How do you experience this here? Because the German language discourse, I think, in this one is even more prohibitive than most other European discourses. How do we turn this discourse around? Every time I try to have a calm conversation, even just like getting to know what the other people think, we get to a very fast extreme immediately.
Yeah, I mean, like even within my family, I struggle to talk about it. And even if we are technically all of the same kind of position, all of the same opinion, yeah, there's still a lot of tension around how to have that conversation. I don't know, at least when I'm discussing it within my family, it's not a question about Islam or Islamophobia. It becomes very much about this, you know, very specific, situation or a genocide that's happening in Gaza.
Yeah, I could just add here that this really, as you had already said, it's very difficult in Austria, in Germany, in the German language to talk about it because of media coverage, as you already mentioned in your first statement, which was really important. And at the same time, I think it's especially in Austria and Germany because of the history of Holocaust to have a very nuanced conversation. It's really hard and painful as well, as you just said.
From just kind of a colloquial discussion that is happening in Turkey, it's very set. Everybody talks about it, everybody agrees about it, everybody already calls it a genocide for what it is. So it is important to use the right word for the people of color as well. So when a land is being erased and the people are moving, if they are Muslim and brown, that doesn't change the terminology. That's my biggest problem living and working in Europe. That people really refrain from using the right terminology because they are afraid of being anti-Semites, which is a whole different topic, obviously. However, it is important to acknowledge, it is important to cover, and it is important to call it what it is. It changes the direction of history writing, and we will be responsible if we do not fight about this. We will be responsible for this genocide not being on the books as one. We will be responsible for people who are misplaced forever and forever in search of a home for generations to come. We will be responsible for generational trauma.
A mai beszélgetést Bécsben az Alte Schmiede Kunstverein, vagyis az Öreg Kovácsok Művészeti Egyesület látja vendégül. Ezt az irodalmi szalont Bécs belvárosában egy nehéz kovács műhelyből alakították ki, azaz a berendezést nem csak dísz, hanem az itt használatos eszközöket láthatjátok körülöttünk. Az Alte Schmiede programján koncertek, előadóestek, irodalmi beszélgetések szerepelnek német és angol nyelven, a programok látogatása pedig teljesen ingyenes, nézzetek el oda, hogyha Bécsben jártok. Budapesten a Sebestyén György osztálykönyvtár látott minket vendégül, köszönjük nekik, és most térjünk vissza a beszélgetéshez. I find it extremely hard to open the discussion and keep away from going immediately to your position, my position, we butt heads. I wonder how we somehow lost this message that we should have learned, say, from the Second World War, or, you know, so many times over, that a genocide is a genocide against anyone.
I don't know if in Hungarian historical education or in Vienna, Austrian historical education, did you learn about Uyghurs? Did you learn about the Bosnian genocide? Did you learn about the aftermath of post-colonial North Africa? Are these taught?
I mean, not when I was in school, for sure. We didn't even learn about anything after the Second World War.
Then how are you supposed to know? How are you supposed to form an opinion on that? So it's literally dictates a rewriting of history books.
I think it also leads us back to the question of emotions and what do we need to sit down and listen and understand. And very often it's about understanding that my view and my point of view and my way of life and how I deal with life and conflicts, it's not always the right one. It's not always the best one. I need to understand and make an informed decision, like listening to different parties, to different people. And coming back to the topic of racism and discriminating against others, it comes back to this thing of understanding we are all human beings, and who are we to not allow others to live peacefully? And I think that's it.
I think something really important about that is also to bring those experiences and that knowledge from elsewhere, from Asia, from Africa, from South America, from everywhere, to also allow that to become European, like knowledge that is valid in Europe. Because, you know, when you, like in Bangladesh, for example, as in many other contexts, everyone, you know, reads, you know, the main thinkers of European, you know, philosophy and social science and economics, etc., plus their own, plus, you know, all the people who've been relevant to them culturally and to their historians and to their histories. But in Europe, we don't do that. And I think that that's where we can actually, you know, if we read the histories and the stories from elsewhere, we also start to learn how people are dealing with difference and living with difference elsewhere, or what wasn't working about and what we'd like to be better, you know. I feel like there needs to be more of a common goal as well in that respect, and that is really missing.
You do not need to eat the food that you're served every single day. Sometimes you can choose to go shopping and cook. And in our world, there is something called social media. And if you log in and if you change your algorithm a little bit by just writing a couple of things, your whole vision will change. It's not that hard. Like, you do not need to constantly follow the most famous and supported financially media outlets. You can just go around it a little bit. You can go a little bit to Asia, you can go a little bit to Africa, you can go a little bit to Middle East and see for yourself what's happening. It's really not that hard, and you're not going to be racist if you do that.
Well, media representation and education, although they make a huge impact, and arguably immediately and for the long term, those are also the hardest to change because these are big systems. But although, and I know this is a downer, especially to end on, but I've had this feeling in many discussions that we've had, especially on migrations, refugee situations, we know the solutions. We know, or we know so many elements of solutions, but on the bigger scale of politics, that's not the direction we're going in. So in Europe, in Northern America, the far right is rising, and anti-Muslim hatred is the loudest rallying cry. And it's there in France, it's there in Austria, in Germany, in, you know, Hungary, but you name it. How do we brace for something like this?
I think, as we all collectively said, it all depends on, or it all comes back to, you know, backing your cultural heritage up and also backing your beliefs up, changing the media coverage, at least in your own individual way, trying to train yourself, your children, and your surroundings a little bit better on that. These are actually very simple steps. We cannot change the wider, bigger system at this point. They are too established, but we can work around it.
Yeah, James Baldwin said on the question why people hate is, and why people are racist, if you take that away, what's there is like people underneath that hate are afraid. There's so much fear. And I think there will come a phase where people have to confront themselves with those feelings. What is it that I'm so afraid of? And what do I need to change? And I think sometimes it's easier even for racist people if you open up the conversation that we all need to work on something. It's not just you. I as well have work to do, but maybe you have a little bit more work to do. And sometimes it helps people. Okay. For example, why is it that a hijabi woman is part of the NASA and can fly to the moon with hijab, but impossible to be in a European state in being a judge with hijab? That's not possible at all. And put in like police women, etc. This is not a possibility. So very often it's like just showing people what kind of reality we we invented, what part of, what's our reality and what is wrong with that and how we need to change that.
How do you feel about this, Bianca? I drag you back into this very dark place.
We shouldn't be afraid to be who we are. As in, I think one of the really important things and good things we can do right now is to continue to, you know, to believe and to be, you know, to practice, to, you know, to be present in whatever way is fulfilling to us. And also, again, always to be aware and to be, you know, thoughtful and considerate in how we, you know, how we are with others, how we live with others, but also how we live with ourselves and like what's important to us. This is always an important thing, you know, in that kind of everyday situation of like interacting with people. One thing I think is difficult with dealing with people who are racist is that they often don't understand that they are.
Or feel offended by the proposition.
Exactly,
yeah.
Exactly. And that is extremely difficult to deal with. But that needs constant conversation. But that's something that, Amani, you said in the beginning as well, is this, you know, that there's so many different layers and levels at which we can do anti-racist work. And, you know, it doesn't have to be like, you know, doing workshops, or it can be, you know, that's something extremely valuable and that I find really, really, you know, extremely enriching as well. But it can also be, you know, in just having those kind of slightly confrontational conversations, like as small as they are, or even just a comment, like just as, you know, to redirect a thought. These everyday encounters to me are the most important thing, because at the end of the day, we are all living together and we're interacting with each other. On an everyday level, I can do a lot. There's so much I can do. And I think this is where we really need to find the courage and find the care to be with each other.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this actually helps this case, but I am often reminded in what you say is that most of the people want to think of themselves as good people or good enough people, and when you tell them this was extremely racist or yeah, that's racism, yeah, they feel like they're being personally attacked. So maybe if we generally had an attitude towards personal failings that allows for failing it and then correcting it, so that you're not immediately excommunicated if you did something wrong, maybe that would possibly help. But generally, sort of an idea of personal growth and development would probably help. And I say this also to my Prime Minister. Thank you so much.
gondolsz?
gondolsz? Szerinted fel lehet oldani a kulturális ellentéteket? Lehetséges békésen együtt élni? Írd meg nekünk kommentben, és ha már arra jársz, húzz egy lájkot, iratkozz fel, és küldd el a műsort a kálvinista nénikédnek, meg a kommunista kisöcsédnek, és ha kedved van, támogass minket a patreon.com/eurozine oldalon. Ez a műsor az Eurozin produkciója, ha még nem hallottál az Eurozinről, akkor spuri, azonnal nézd meg a weboldalunkat. Ez a remek online magazin ugyanis hiányterméket árul, méghozzá ingyen. Minőségi, lassú újságírást mindarról, amiről érdemes az embernek gondolkodnia. Európa szerte 100-nál is több partnerlapot szemlézünk és fordítunk angolra, illetve a saját tartalmainkkal mutatjuk az utat a digitális zajban. Médiapartnereink a bécsi Októ TV és Magyarországon az Átlátszó. Ez a talkshow az Európai Unió Kreatív Európa programja és az Európai Kulturális Alapítvány társfinanszírozásával készült. Fontos, hogy az itt kifejtett nézetek és vélemények csak a megszólalók és a szerzőké, nem feltétlenül tükrözik az Európai Unió vagy az Európai Oktatási és Kulturális Végrehajtó Ügynökség véleményét. Sem az Európai Unió, sem az EACEA nem tehető felelőssé értük. Nem mintha bánnánk, ha megfogadnák a tanácsainkat. Nagyon köszönjük az Altes Kunstvereinnek Bécsben és a Sebestyén György osztrák könyvtárnak Budapesten, hogy vendégül láttak minket.